Rain tapped hard against the metal roof of the garage, like 1,000 impatient fingers drumming in rhythm with the storm inside me. The air smelled of gasoline and heat and something older, something unspoken. We were standing too close. Again. The kind of close you pretend isn't happening, even as your breath catches and your thoughts scatter like leaves across pavement. His eyes were on mine, not moving. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking louder than the thunder outside. Neither of us said a word. Neither of us had to. We both leaned in, just a little. Just enough for the world to disappear. And right before anything could happen, before anything crossed that final invisible line, the overhead light flickered. A loud metallic crash came from the other side of the garage. And everything stopped. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: would you be able to forgive a loved one's betrayal? I always thought the hardest part of a slow marriage was the silence. The way the days stack on top of each other until the weight of them dulls everything sharp. You stop noticing. You stop asking. You fold laundry while a game plays in the background and realize you haven't looked your husband in the eye all week. It started like that. Quietly. The day my car started making that sound, it was a Tuesday, late August. The kind of Midwest Tuesday where the heat doesn't come from the sun, but from the concrete still radiating the weekend before. I was heading to Costco, my list memorized: paper towels, light bulbs, yogurt, the exact brand of coffee he liked. I was halfway down the road when the engine made a grinding hiccup, like a deep breath that never came out. By the time I got back home, my hands were clenched on the steering wheel. He barely looked up from the recliner. "Take it to the shop tomorrow," he muttered, still holding the remote. "Probably the alternator again." I stood there, keys in hand, waiting for something else. A follow-up. A glance. Anything. But the commercial break was over, and the game resumed, and I was already invisible again. So I took the car to the garage. The place was exactly the same as always, as cluttered, buzzing with old fluorescent lights, the air filled with motor oil and worn country music from a radio with duct tape on it. He stood near the back, bent over an open hood. I hadn't seen him in months, though he used to come over for Thanksgiving back when the kids were little. He looked up, wiped his hands on a red rag, and smiled. "Didn't expect you." "I didn't expect the car to sound like a dying lawnmower," I said, trying not to smile back. He laughed, that kind of laugh that makes you feel like a person again. "I can take a look now if you've got time." I did. Too much of it. We talked while he worked. About the heat, about the old 4th of July barbecue where he set off illegal fireworks and my husband nearly called the cops on his own friend. He handed me a cold bottle of Coke from the old machine in the corner. I sat on a stool that wobbled and listened to the way he talked, casual, easy, like he wasn't watching the clock the way my husband always did. When he slid under the car, I could still see his boots and the bottom of his jeans. "You ever get back to painting?" he asked suddenly, voice muffled by the chassis. I blinked. "Painting? Yeah. You used to talk about it. Back when the kids were still in school. Said you missed it." I hadn't thought about that in years. "No," I said. "I guess I forgot." He rolled back out and sat up. Some things shouldn't be forgotten. He was talking about paint. I told myself that again and again. He offered to test drive it. Said he'd feel more than I would behind the wheel. I climbed into the passenger seat. It was an old truck, the kind that smelled of summer and leather and distant years. We drove in silence for a while. Then he pulled into a gas station, got out, came back with a pack of red vines and handed them to me without a word. "Still your favorite, right?" Something tightened in my throat. On the way back, I asked him if the noise meant something serious. Nah, he said. Just needed a little attention. When we pulled back into my driveway, he didn't turn off the engine right away. We sat there for a second too long. Thank you, I said, taking the keys. Anytime, he said. I walked up the porch steps, feeling his eyes on me the whole way. Inside, the house was quiet. My husband was yelling at the TV again, something about a bad call. There was laundry on the couch, and dishes in the sink, and the ceiling fan made a squeak with every turn. I stared at the floor, listening to the hum of a life I had built and let run on autopilot. Later that night, when I couldn't sleep, I found myself scrolling on my phone. I typed in the name of the garage and opened its Instagram page. Photos of classic cars. Dusty dashboards. One image caught my eye, a side mirror shot of an old Ford. In the reflection, blurred but unmistakable, was a woman's silhouette. Same shirt. Same sunglasses. Same posture as mine earlier that day. I stared at it for too long. The next morning, I told myself I had imagined it. That it didn't mean anything. That people take thousands of pictures and don't even notice what's in the background. But I kept the tab open. I didn't close it for 3 days. And that was how it began. Not with intention. Not with guilt. But with a hum under the surface, a faint, low rattle that you ignore until it becomes impossible to unhear. And once you hear it, you can't go back. Because some engines don't just need fixing. Some are already running toward the edge. The tab with the garage's Instagram was still open when I woke up the next morning. I stared at that photo again, zoomed in, zoomed out, tilted my screen like it might reveal something new. It didn't. Just a blur of light and shape in the chrome. But I knew it was me. And I knew I had liked being in it. I didn't mention the sound to my husband again. I told him I was going to run errands. He grunted from the recliner, already half lost in a morning show. I left before the host could even finish her sentence. The garage was quieter this time. Only one other car in the bay. I told him the noise was still there. He raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. He just wiped his hands and said, "Want me to check again?" I handed him the keys like they were a secret. While he worked, I brought out the banana bread I'd baked at 6 in the morning, the one I pretended was for a church thing. He took a bite and grinned. Said it tasted like last summer. I didn't ask what that meant. I just sat on the same wobbly stool, watching his movements, the way his hands moved with certainty. We kept talking. About nothing and everything. The kind of talk that wraps around your chest and makes the air feel thinner. The kind where you can almost forget what you're not saying. I asked him if he ever thought about moving out of town. He said, only when it snows. I asked him if he ever thought about marrying. He laughed. Too much trouble. The radio crackled out some old song, something with a slide guitar, and I realized I didn't know when I started smiling. When I stood to leave, I brushed my hand on the hood of the car by accident, leaving a smudge of oil. He handed me a rag, his fingers brushing mine just briefly. I held that rag a little too long before wiping my hand. Back at home, I tried to throw myself into the rhythm of the day. Laundry. Dishes. Sweeping the porch. My husband asked if we were out of barbecue sauce. I said yes. He asked if I could pick some up. I said I'd go after dinner. I left the dishes in the sink. Left the laundry half-folded on the bed. The sky had started to darken just slightly, a dusky orange creeping along the edges. I didn't take the main road. I drove the long way, past the middle school, the dog park, the place that used to be a bakery before it became another payday loan place. He was outside when I pulled up, leaning against the garage frame like he'd been expecting something but didn't want to admit it. I didn't say a word. I just walked up and asked him something pointless. I don't even remember what. Probably about belts or filters or whatever made sense in the moment. He didn't answer. Just looked at me. Then we kissed. I walked away before anything could be said. I drove around for an hour after that. My hands were trembling, but I wasn't afraid. I was alive. More than I had been in years. I pulled into the driveway and took a deep breath. The porch light was off. The kitchen light was on. Inside, my husband was halfway through a sandwich, the TV playing softly in the background. He asked if I found the sauce. I lied and said the store was out. He nodded, chewing slowly, barely looking up. I told him I'd left the laundry on the bed. He didn't hear me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body kept reliving the moment. Not the kiss. But the silence after. The absence of guilt. That should have scared me. It didn't. At 3 in the morning, I got up and walked downstairs. Opened the fridge. Closed it again. Then I looked out the window. The neighbor's porch light flicked on. It wasn't motion activated. It was switched on. He stood there, a silhouette in the window, sipping from a mug. I blinked. He lifted the mug slightly, as if acknowledging me. And then he turned it off. I went back upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and sat on the floor until the sun started to rise. Nothing was said. Nothing was done. But something had changed. Something I couldn't name yet. And someone was watching. The porch light stayed off the next morning, but the feeling didn't. It clung to me, tight, invisible, electric. I couldn't shake the memory of the way the neighbor had looked at me through the window. Not accusing. Not curious. Just aware. Like a person who sees too much but chooses silence because it suits them better. At breakfast, my husband scrolled through his phone while sipping from his chipped mug. He didn't ask where I'd been the night before. I didn't offer it. The routine held: eggs overcooked, jam forgotten, napkin tucked sloppily under his wrist. He muttered something about the lawn looking bad. I nodded. At some point during the dishes, I decided I wasn't done with the garage. It was Labor Day weekend. People were setting up flags, grilling early, dragging coolers into backyards. Our house stayed still. My husband planted himself on the couch, a bag of pretzels beside him, the TV humming about playoff chances. I told him I was going to Lowe's. He didn't look up. I didn't go to Lowe's. I drove to the garage without music on. The wind buzzed through the open windows. My stomach did that fluttering thing again, half excitement, half dread. It didn't feel like cheating yet. It felt like crossing a thin bridge in the fog, not sure if there was ground on the other side. He was there, of course. The truck was parked sideways by the fence. The garage doors were wide open, the air inside thick with warmth and smell and static. I parked beside the dumpster, in the spot no one used. A quiet place, shadowed from the street. He was working on a '79 Corvette. Blue. Dented just behind the left wheel. The kind of car someone held onto for memory's sake. He glanced up, surprised but not. Like he'd left that door open on purpose. "You're back," he said. "I needed air," I replied. "And you always have good air." He smiled. The radio was playing soft rock now, something from the late '80s. We didn't talk for a while. I leaned against the door, arms folded, letting the engine ticks and fan belts fill the space. Then I asked if he ever regretted staying in town. He thought for a second, then said, "Sometimes I think people don't leave because they're afraid they'll matter even less somewhere else." I nodded. He mentioned how time feels different in the garage, slower, heavier. Like it traps things. Feelings. Decisions. He leaned against the frame of the car and asked if I'd ride with him while he tested the Corvette. It's overdue for movement, he said. We drove out slowly, the road vibrating beneath the wheels. The wind came through the windows hard, flinging my hair in every direction. I didn't try to fix it. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually on the gearshift. Not close to me, but not far. We didn't speak until we hit the traffic light near the edge of town. He turned to look at me, eyes steady, like someone who was about to say something but needed permission first. We kissed. He pulled away first. The light turned green. We didn't speak the rest of the way back. At home, I deleted my location history. I cleared the car's GPS. I wiped the red vines wrapper from the seat pocket. I even washed the inside of the windshield for no reason. Dinner was already half made. I threw something together. Overcooked again. My husband asked if I could put on that show he liked, the one with the couples renovating a farmhouse in Vermont. I did. I sat beside him. Nodded when he pointed out the ugly paint color. Laughed once, on cue. Midway through the episode, he said, "By the way, your guy called." I looked up. Garage guy. Said something about a part. Thought you already handled it? I told him it must have been a mix-up. That I'd follow up tomorrow. He shrugged and went back to the show. Later that night, after he fell asleep in the chair, I went out onto the porch. The air was cooler now. Someone down the street was lighting sparklers. Their kids shrieked with joy, the way kids do when they don't know the world can turn sharp. I watched the sparks burn out before they hit the ground. Across the street, the neighbor's window was dark. But something pulled at me. I walked out barefoot. Not far. Just to the edge of our lawn. The air smelled like charcoal and wet leaves. A car passed, slow. The driver glanced at me. I turned away. The neighbor's porch had a faint glow under the rail. Like maybe a bug light, or maybe something else. I turned back before I reached the curb. I slept in the guest room that night. Told my husband I had a headache. He didn't argue. Just grunted and went to bed. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen sipping cold coffee, trying to convince myself that it was still just confusion. A detour. Something temporary. But something was changing. Slowly. Irrevocably. And then it happened. That afternoon, the neighbor across the street installed a new Wi-Fi extender. I saw him from the window, standing on a stepladder, screwdriver in one hand, cable in the other. He looked tired. Focused. Normal. But then something strange. He pulled out his phone. Looked at it. Then looked up at our house. Not a glance. A hold. And then he walked inside, leaving the ladder there. No movement after that. Just silence. That night, I sat on the back porch with the lights off, wrapped in a blanket. The wind had picked up. A storm somewhere far away was trying to make itself known. Inside, the fridge buzzed. The dryer clicked off. My husband muttered something in his sleep. I was alone. I was surrounded. I was floating. And someone was watching. I didn't know how. But I felt it. Somewhere, something had shifted. And it wasn't going back. I told myself I was going to end it. I said the words out loud, like saying them would make them true. I even looked at myself in the mirror while folding laundry, whispering, "It stops now." But my hands didn't believe it. My feet didn't believe it. The way I checked the mirror before grabbing my keys definitely didn't believe it. It was almost dark when I backed out of the driveway. My husband was asleep on the couch, a half-eaten sandwich resting on his chest. I turned the volume down on the TV and left without a sound. The sky was the color of rust, clouds gathering like they had somewhere to be. I took side streets, past 2 block parties and a fire truck hosing off the sidewalk for the kids. Music echoed from backyards, the scent of charcoal mixed with mowed grass and spilled beer. I kept driving. When I pulled into the alley behind the garage, the door was already cracked open. Just enough to be a question. I parked and stood there for a moment before pushing it open all the way. He was there, leaning against the workbench, holding a beer in one hand, rag in the other. The radio was off. The fans were off. The place was still. Neither of us said anything. I stepped inside. The door rolled shut behind me. We talked. Not about us, not really. He told me about growing up in Kansas. About long summers and rusted bikes and the girl he once thought he'd marry. I asked what happened. He shrugged. Said she picked someone with a future. I asked what he picked. He said, comfort. I told him I used to paint. Years ago. Watercolors, mostly. Before the kids, before the yard, before the routine. He said I should have kept going. I said there was no time. He said there's always time. We sat in the quiet. Rain started tapping the roof. Soft at first, then harder, like it was trying to get inside. I turned off my phone and set it down face down on the edge of the tool bench. That gesture felt bigger than it was. He noticed, didn't say a thing. The smell in the garage shifted, rain mixing with oil, with warm concrete, with the soft residue of old metal. I noticed the crack in the floor by the left wall. I noticed the way one of the overhead lights flickered, then held. He shifted closer. Still no words. We spent night together. At some point, I fell asleep. Not deeply. Not comfortably. Just enough to lose track of time. The rain had stopped. The air felt thicker, like it had stored everything we'd said and left it hanging there. I got dressed slowly, folding my shirt like it mattered. He sat on the edge of the bench, watching the floor. Outside, the first light was breaking, soft and pale. I opened the garage quietly, stepped out, and didn't look back. My car felt colder than it should have. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked the same. Porch light still off. Grass still damp. Inside, my husband was snoring lightly, curled up now. The sandwich was gone. The blanket had slipped to the floor. I went upstairs, washed my face, brushed my teeth twice. I looked at myself for a long time in the mirror, trying to find something left to recognize. Later that morning, we went to church. It was something we hadn't done in weeks, maybe months. A last-minute decision. He said it might help clear our heads. I didn't argue. I wore a cardigan I hadn't touched in a year. One that used to fit better. We sat near the back, like always. The sermon was about forgiveness. I didn't listen to the words, just the spaces between them. I kept my hands folded, eyes down. At one point, I glanced across the room. The neighbor was there. He was 2 pews up, alone. He turned slightly. Our eyes met for half a second. He smiled. Polite. Controlled. Measured. I looked away. My heart did something strange, something uneven. Not from guilt. From fear. Not of him, but of what he knew. Or what he might. When we got home, I busied myself in the kitchen. Washed plates that were already clean. Wiped counters twice. My husband took a nap upstairs. I stood at the window, watching the breeze play with the flag on the neighbor's porch. It didn't move much. That evening, as the sun was dipping low, I went to the mailbox barefoot. Bills. Coupons. Grocery flyer. A small padded envelope tucked at the bottom. No name. No handwriting. No markings. I froze. Walked inside slowly, heart pounding. I peeled it open at the dining table, standing. Inside was a USB drive. No note. No branding. Just a standard black thumb drive, like the kind kids use for school reports or old tax files. I held it for a long time. Then I put it back in the envelope, slid it into the drawer under the phone charger, and shut it quietly. My husband came downstairs a few minutes later, asking if we still had that frozen chili. I told him yes, pointing to the second shelf. He thanked me and didn't notice the way my hands were shaking. Didn't notice I hadn't blinked in over a minute. I watched him stir the chili in silence. And for the first time in all of this, I wasn't sure who was about to break first. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the fridge cycle on and off, to the neighbor's dog bark once, pause, and then go quiet. I didn't touch the envelope again. I didn't even open the drawer. But I felt it there. Like it had a pulse. Like it was breathing in the dark. At sunrise, I got up and dressed quietly. My husband was snoring with his mouth open, one arm over his head like a man who'd never learned how to sleep beside someone. I left the room without brushing my teeth, without checking my phone. Downstairs, I made coffee I wouldn't drink and stared at the window, watching the mailbox. An hour passed before I made up my mind. I plugged the USB into my laptop. There were 3 files. No labels. No folders. Just dates. No instructions. No names. I opened the most recent. The video started instantly. Silent. Grainy. It showed me stepping out of the Corvette in the alley behind the garage. Brushing hair from my face. Smiling. Looking behind me. He followed. The door opened. I walked in. The footage cut there. I felt sick. The next file was from a few days earlier. I watched myself approach him while he leaned on the hood of a car. Watched myself hand him something, banana bread. We laughed. I looked over my shoulder twice. He touched my hand. I didn't move away. The third video was shorter. Just me standing outside his garage, waiting. Then him stepping out, wiping his hands on that red rag, smiling at me. That was all. No sound. No context. But I saw it all through someone else's eyes, and it felt worse than I could have imagined. I ejected the drive and dropped it into the trash can beside the fridge. Then I pulled it out and stuffed it under the sink with the empty batteries and crumpled plastic bags. I wanted to burn it, but I didn't. Later that day, I went back to the garage. I didn't park out back this time. I pulled straight into the lot like I had nothing to hide. Like I wasn't unraveling inside. He was at the lift, working under a truck. I waited by the door until he noticed me. He wiped his hands. Walked over. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer. He didn't push. We walked to the far corner of the garage, past the old vending machine, past the stacks of tires. I told him about the USB. I told him someone was watching. That I didn't know who. That the videos weren't just from the alley. Some were from inside the lot. Up close. He went quiet. Tensed. I said I couldn't do this anymore. He nodded slowly. I said we were being followed. He didn't ask how I knew. He didn't doubt me. He only said, "You want out?" I said, "I think we already are." We stood there for another minute. The air was thick with something unspoken, but neither of us reached for it. Back home, I made dinner early. Chicken thighs. Roasted squash. I overcooked the rice again. My husband walked in while I was slicing lemons. He paused in the doorway, looked at me like I was someone he almost recognized. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said. He nodded and went to wash his hands. We ate in silence. The kind that scrapes at the edge of your thoughts. That night, after he went to bed, I walked down the block. Just for air. I passed the neighbor's house. His car was gone. Porch light off. Nothing in the windows. I kept walking. Turned the corner. Circled the block. When I came back, there was something different about the sidewalk. A man was standing in front of our house. Not close, across the street. Still. Hands in his pockets. Head down. I paused near the corner, watching. He didn't move. I crossed to the other side, stayed in the shadows behind the neighbor's hedge. It was the man from the garage. He didn't see me. He just stood there. Looking at the house. After a few minutes, he turned and walked down the street, disappearing into the dark without a word. I didn't follow. I waited 5 minutes, then went back inside. The house was quiet. The air felt sharp. I climbed into bed and lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering why he came, why he didn't knock, why he didn't call, and most of all, why I felt more shaken by his silence than anything else. But none of it compared to what I saw the next morning. I stepped outside to get the mail. Bills, junk, grocery coupons. I flipped through them slowly, hands numb from the air. Then I saw it. A new post in the neighborhood Facebook group. I didn't even have to open the app. I saw it through the kitchen tablet, which my husband had left unlocked. Someone had posted a blurry screenshot. A still frame from one of the videos. Me. Standing by the open garage door. My hand resting on the frame. My face half lit. The caption read, "Guess who's not just getting their oil changed?" The comments had already started. The first few were playful. The next ones weren't. I turned off the screen. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. And in that moment, I knew something that made my stomach twist harder than the fear of being seen. This wasn't a secret anymore. It was a story. And someone else was telling it. I closed the tablet slowly, like that would somehow keep the news from leaking out. But it was already too late. My name wasn't in the post. No tags, no comments that pointed directly at me. But people knew. Or they'd guess. That was worse in some ways, the whispers, the pauses in conversation when you enter a room, the "did you hear" murmured just loud enough to catch your attention. I stood there in the kitchen, frozen. The refrigerator buzzed. The ceiling fan clacked softly. I could hear my husband walking down the stairs behind me. I didn't turn. He passed through the hallway, grabbed a jacket off the hook, and said he was going to the neighbor's house for a quick chat. Said it like he was mentioning the weather. Calm. Measured. I still didn't turn. Just nodded. The front door closed. I finally moved. I walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, and let the water run until it turned cold. My hands hovered above it. Then I turned it off again and pressed my palms to the edge of the counter. The walk back from the neighbors took him less than 10 minutes. He didn't slam the door. He didn't shout. He walked straight past me. into the living room. Sat on the edge of the couch. On the coffee table in front of him, something I didn't see him carry, was the same envelope. The one I had buried under the sink. He looked at it. Then looked at me. Was it just once? He asked. I didn't answer. Don't lie, he added. Still, I said nothing. He picked up the envelope, held it loosely in one hand like he wasn't sure whether to throw it or crush it. He said he didn't mean to give it to me. That he meant to give it to you. I blinked, confused. The neighbor? I asked. No, he said. Your mechanic. Everything stopped. The quiet between us sharpened, like glass breaking inward. I sat down at the opposite end of the couch. A cushion and 1,000 miles between us. He spoke again, slow and quiet. He came over last night. I saw him through the window. He didn't know I was home. Knocked once. I didn't answer. I felt the floor shift under me. He just stood there a while. Then he left something in the mailbox. My chest tightened. The USB? He nodded. I thought the neighbor. He didn't know what was on it, my husband interrupted. Didn't even look. Said someone left it for him. He thought you should see it first. He looked tired. Not angry. Just exhausted in a way I hadn't seen before. Like someone who'd been underwater too long and wasn't sure how to breathe air anymore. I didn't watch them all, he said. I didn't ask how many. He stood up then. Grabbed the car keys. Paused at the door. I need a few days, he said. I nodded. He looked at me one last time. Don't call me. The door closed behind him. The sound echoed through the house like a slammed drawer. I sat there for a long time after he left. The envelope still on the table. I didn't touch it. I didn't cry. I just sat. By the time I finally moved, the afternoon light had started to creep into the room, low and golden and uninvited. I drove. I didn't tell myself where I was going. But the road curved in the direction I knew too well. Past the edge of town. Down the familiar street that led to the garage. I didn't park out back. I didn't hide. I pulled into the front lot and stepped out like I had a right to be there. He was inside, wiping his hands, standing beside a sedan with its hood up. He looked up when I walked in. Said nothing. You left it? I asked. He nodded. I thought it was him. I figured. Why did you give it to him? He paused. I thought he already knew. I stared at him. He does now. He leaned against the car. What do you want me to say? I don't know, I said. Anything that makes this make sense. I can't do that, he said. Because it doesn't. He walked to the far side of the garage, grabbed a rag, and wiped his hands again even though they were already clean. That nervous gesture I'd seen before. I didn't want it to go like this, he said. I didn't want it to end with blame. I stepped closer. It didn't have to. He looked up at me. You think we get to choose how things end? We stood there in the quiet. Eventually, I turned to leave. My hand on the door, I paused. I wanted to say something else. But I didn't. As I pulled out of the lot, I didn't look back. I drove for a while with no plan. Eventually I pulled into the Target parking lot. I didn't go inside. Just sat there, letting the sun hit the windshield until my skin burned. On the way home, I passed the PTA president at a red light. She looked over. Smiled awkwardly. Then looked away before the light turned green. I kept driving. When I got home, the neighbor was in his yard, raking leaves. He didn't look at me. I didn't wave. I went inside, poured myself a glass of water, let it sit untouched on the counter. Then I walked to the closet and pulled out an old box from the top shelf. Inside was a baseball cap, faded and sun-bleached. A photo from a summer car show, folded at the corners. And a pack of red vines he once gave me, still unopened. I put them all in a small cardboard box. I didn't leave a note. I drove back to the garage. He wasn't outside. The door was open. I placed the box on his workbench and left. When I got home, I didn't check the tablet. I didn't cook dinner. I sat on the back porch until the sky went black. And in the silence that followed, I understood something terrifying. This wasn't about being caught anymore. It was about being seen. Entirely. And the pieces of me left scattered were no longer mine to gather. The next morning I went to the store and realized I didn't know what to buy anymore. I wandered the aisles with an empty cart, holding a list that didn't belong to anyone in particular. People passed by with their heads tilted low, pretending not to see me, or worse, letting their gaze linger just a second too long. I saw a woman from my book club in the produce section. She was pretending to inspect bell peppers but glanced at me with that same half-smile, half-flinch I'd seen before. I turned away and walked 3 aisles over. My chest felt like it had shrunk 2 sizes. Even the cashier's tone had changed. Polite but distant. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't make small talk. She double-bagged everything without a word, like I might break if she spoke too loud. Outside in the parking lot, I stood beside the car for a minute before getting in. The air was thick, warm for late fall. Someone had left a shopping cart blocking my front bumper. I moved it quietly, got in, and drove away like I'd stolen something. Instead of heading home, I pulled into the library lot. I hadn't been there in years. I walked past the front desk without making eye contact and wandered through the non-fiction section until I found an empty chair between 2 tall shelves. I sat there and let the silence hold me together. An older woman sat a few rows over, flipping through a large print novel. She noticed me. I knew she recognized me. But she didn't react the way I expected. She closed her book, walked over, and sat beside me with the ease of someone who didn't care about appearances. "Men do worse every day," she said, her voice soft, calm. "They just don't get caught on camera." I stared at her, caught between shame and surprise. "I was you once," she added. "Long time ago." Town's memory is short, but their judgment is loud. "It'll pass." I nodded, but I didn't believe her. I left the library and drove for hours. No destination. Just roads I hadn't taken in years. I ended up in Indianapolis, in front of a small art museum I used to visit before marriage made space for practical things. Inside, the rooms were cold and smelled faintly of wood and old air. I walked past landscapes, portraits, abstract smudges on giant white canvases. I didn't stop at any one painting. I just moved. Slowly. Quietly. A security guard asked if I wanted a photo in front of the exhibit banner. I shook my head. He smiled and moved on. That night I ate at a diner off I-70. The kind of place with cracked leather booths and fluorescent lighting that buzzed a little too loud. I ordered the chicken fried steak, didn't finish it. The waitress refilled my coffee 3 times and never once asked why I looked like I'd forgotten how to sleep. When I got home, the lights were on. My husband was back. His suitcase sat by the door, zipped and upright. He was in the living room, staring at the blank TV. Not watching anything. Just sitting. He didn't say hello. I didn't either. I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, then joined him on the couch. We sat at opposite ends like strangers in an airport lounge. Eventually he spoke. I saw everything. I didn't move. I don't want a divorce, he said. Not yet. Still, I said nothing. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. But you can't see him again. His words were tired, not cruel. Just a man drawing a line in the sand after the tide already erased the last one. I stared at the coffee table, at a coaster stained with iced tea rings from summers we no longer remembered. That part of our life is over now, he added. I whispered, whose life? He looked at me then. Really looked. But he didn't answer. The next morning, I woke before him and packed a small box. I drove to the garage. It was early, the sky still pink, the streets nearly empty. The garage doors were shut, lights off. I didn't knock. I left the box on the workbench inside. I knew he'd find it. Inside the box was his old baseball cap. The one he'd forgotten in my car once. The photo from the car show we'd gone to last summer. And the red vines he gave me. I didn't write a note. I didn't need to. As I turned to leave, I saw him standing by the side door, watching me. He didn't say anything. He walked over to the box after I stepped outside. I stood by my car and waited. He opened it. Picked up the photo. And tore it in half. Not quickly. Not angrily. Just deliberately. Then he walked back inside. I drove away. That night, I sat on the porch alone. The air was cold. The streets were empty. Halloween decorations flapped in the wind from a neighbor's porch. The only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves skidding down the sidewalk like they were trying to leave too. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't cry. Instead, I just sat there, feeling the weight of all the versions of myself I had tried to hold on to. Wife. Friend. Secret. And I realized I didn't belong to any of them now. I was something else entirely. But I wasn't sure what yet. Thanksgiving week came in gray and heavy, the kind of Midwest gloom that settled into the bones of the house. We didn't put out decorations. No turkey thawed in the fridge. The grocery list on the counter had been scratched out, rewritten, and finally crumpled into the trash. My husband didn't mention inviting anyone. I didn't ask. He spent most of his time outside, smoking a cigar on the back porch. I watched him once through the window, his shoulders hunched, lips tied around the filter like it was holding him together. The ashtray beside him was already full by noon. He didn't look up when I passed. I tried to bake out of habit. A pecan pie I used to make with the kids when they were little. I burned it. Left it too long, distracted by a flicker of movement outside. I stared through the window, but no one was there. Just wind brushing the edge of the fence, making the old bird feeder swing lazily. I turned off the oven. Let the pie sit and deflate. The house felt louder in silence. Every clock ticked too sharply. The dryer rumbled even when it wasn't running. The refrigerator made a low groaning hum like it was tired of holding everything in place. I walked past the bedroom, glanced in. His suitcase was still by the wall, untouched since he brought it back. Neither of us had moved it. Late afternoon, I left the house. Walked aimlessly through the neighborhood. The decorations had already shifted from pumpkins to pine garlands. Plastic reindeer appeared on rooftops. Kids kicked leaves down the sidewalks in oversized coats. I passed the garage. It was closed. Lights off. No music. No smell of oil or old tires. Just a for sale sign leaning against the fence, not quite planted in the ground. Someone was inside, though. A man I didn't recognize loading boxes into a U-Haul parked in the back. He didn't look at me. Didn't smile. Just moved with that practiced rhythm of someone paid to disappear someone else's life. The sight of it stopped me. I hadn't known. I stood there for longer than I should have. He finished loading a box, wiped his hands on his pants, and went back inside. I took a step closer, then turned and walked away. I ended up at the church. It was mostly empty, just the usual quiet visitors sitting far apart like ghosts too polite to haunt one another. I lit a candle. Sat in a pew near the back. Tried to pray, but nothing came. Just breath. Just stillness. A mother entered with her daughter. The girl skipped ahead, stopped when she saw me. She whispered something to her mom, who turned and glanced with a kind smile that tightened when she recognized me. She nudged her daughter toward another row. I stood. Walked out before the priest started speaking. At a gas station off the main road, I stopped for gum. I saw it again, an old Chevy, parked by the ice machine. Same dent on the bumper. My heart leapt. I stepped closer. But it wasn't him. Just a stranger with the same faded hat, his head bent over a scratch-off ticket. I stood there too long before turning away. Back home, I found my husband sitting in the kitchen, scrolling through the news. He looked up briefly, then down again. "I brought your gloves in," he said. "Thanks." Silence. "You always wanted more," he said after a moment. "You just didn't know what it cost." I leaned against the fridge. "Neither did you." He nodded once. Said nothing else. That night, I went to check the mail. The cold hit my face fast. I hadn't realized how late it was. Stars were just barely visible behind low-hanging clouds. The mailbox creaked. Junk mail. Coupons. A holiday catalog from a store we hadn't shopped at in years. And then, tucked between the pages, a small envelope. No return address. No handwriting. Inside, a single photo. A printed, matte finish photo. I pulled it out slowly. It was me. Leaning against the garage wall, mid-laugh. My eyes squinted, smile wide, the way I didn't smile anymore. My arms were crossed, my head tilted back slightly. It was a moment I didn't even remember. A frame no one should have caught. No kiss. No touch. Just a version of myself I didn't recognize, caught in something weightless. Something real. I turned it over. There was handwriting on the back. Only one sentence, "Only thing I regret is you walking away." And then, below it, another line. Smaller. Fainter. "Check your porch." I froze. The night air suddenly felt sharper, more alive. I looked toward the house. The porch light was still off. My feet moved before I could think. I rounded the sidewalk, hard in my throat. And there, on the porch step, sat something I hadn't seen in months. My old paint box. Dusty, scuffed, but unmistakable. The leather straps. The dented corner. The small tag I'd put on it years ago, faded with time, "Keep creating." I stared at it. Inside the house, I heard the sound of a chair sliding back. The front door creaked open behind me. But I didn't turn. I just stood there, in the cold, staring at that box like it was a question I didn't know how to answer.